Welcome back to Cruder.com. In this next video, we're going to be going into everything you need to know to master the Vlookup formula. I've set up this supply chain example and created this purchasing data spreadsheet. It starts with the PO, the purchase order number, and then it tells the line number next to it. And then it goes into what item number was purchased on that line of the purchase order number, along with the quantity, price, extended price, and then the buyer's initials for the overall purchase order here. And then it goes into the next one, 3443, all the way down here. And there's 10 lines and 10 items that we were buying on this, and JJB, those initials purchased it. So let's go ahead and start typing a dynamic Vlookup formula. Let's start off with an easy example and manually type this in. So I'm just going to do a Vlookup formula. Now let's pretend that we're going to be trying to find the PO number 3443 in this table, and then return, let's say, the column of quantity. So there's 400 right here. So the first thing, I'm going to type in 3443. It's a number, so that's why I'm not putting it in double quotes, comma, the table array is this. So I'm going to arrow, holding Control and Shift, arrow to the right, then down, and that'll grab the entire range. Scroll back up, comma, and the column index that I'm looking for is the 5th column. So this is my first column, second column, third, fourth, fifth. And again, we're looking for quantity, so I just want to type in the number 5, comma, and we want to have an exact lookup match. So I'm going to type in false, or you could put in a 0, and you'll see it returns 400. Again, that's because Excel came to here, found that this is 3443, went over 5 columns, and then returned the 400. The question is that, well, why didn't Excel go down to the second 3443? How did it know to stop at the first? Well, Excel stops at the first because it stops at the first instance where the criteria is matched to the value that we're looking up, and then goes over 5 columns and returns the 400. Now this isn't very useful because it's not very often that you say, hey, I only want to stop at the first instance of something. You usually want to say, hey, I want to stop at whatever instance I tell you to. So we need to make the PO column unique, and by default the PO column can't be unique. It has to be combined with something to then make it unique. So these are like what I call helper columns, or making it unique. You'll hear people use that term a lot, a helper column. And it's simply combining two things to therefore make it one unique column or key. So I'm going to grab the PO number, and then I'm going to concatenate that with the line. So to concatenate quickly, I'm just going to use the ampersand sign and then combine it with the line and hit enter. So now instead of having 3442 appended on that number 1 right next to it, so it took two pieces of information, concatenated or combined them together, and made one unique string. I'm going to double click to pop this down, and now we have a complete unique column where we can reference this key and then go over to the quantity column on whatever line number we want. So let's go ahead and do that. First, let's make this dynamic. So I'm going to type in 3443 as the PO, the line, let's look up at the first line, and the column that we want to return. Now since we're using the unique column, we're going to go over 1, 2, 3, so only 3 columns, and hopefully we'll get the same number, 400. So to do this, we're going to start typing Vlookup, and the lookup value is going to be actually the concatenation of PO and line that I've typed up here. So I'm going to say, or reference, this cell, ampersand, this line, comma. Now because we're using this unique column, we have to start on this column as my leftmost column and leave out these other 2 columns. So I'm going to actually, from here, I'm going to hold Control Shift and then just hit down to extend it to the bottom. And so it's going to first start in my leftmost column, find that number, then pop over 1, 2, then 3 to the 3rd column, and then return that value. So I'm going to continue this with putting a comma, the 3rd column. So again, I'm going to reference instead of type it, another comma, and it needs to be an exact match. So I'm going to put false. And then I'm going to end the parentheses. Now this is pretty cool because we have a dynamic Vlookup formula going on here. We can change any of these 3 cells and a different lookup value will be returned. So let's try it. So we can do 3445 and we can change, you can see it quickly, it changed right there. Line number 2, and it changed again. And instead of having the quantity, let's put in the buyer. So the buyer would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6, and SSC is purchasing this one. And you can see actually, I believe it's right here, this line. So 3445 line 2, and then this is the buyer. So what happens if our lookup values right here, this PO in the line, what if it doesn't exist in this purchasing data table or in this unique column? So let's test this. So if I put in a 3, that doesn't exist. This PO over here only goes up to line 1 and line 2. So if I put a 3 in, it says NA, it says it can't find it. So what I like to do is always handle your errors. And what I mean by that is wrap the formula with the if error formula by just typing if error, open parentheses, and then the first value, or this argument that it's asking for, is value. It's saying, is this formula an error? And if it is, comma, value if error, then go ahead and put like something that just says error. And otherwise, it's going to return the non-error value. So let me change it back to 2, and you can see it goes back to that name. If I change it to 3, it turns to error. Now let's take a look at another example I've put together here for this depreciation forecast table. And as you can see, it's 3 months, January, February, and March, and then a quarter to date, a quarter total. And it's separated by the depreciation types of computer hardware, software, and then other types of equipment. Now down below, I've put together this dynamic Vlookup. And as you can see, I have a drop-down menu where I can pick different types of depreciation types, and it changed that value actually. I don't know if you noticed that, so let me change it to equipment. This was 17, now it's 14. It's actually finding this 14, one of these. Let's see, it's February it's looking at, so it's actually looking at equipment under February 14995. Now again, this is also with data validation. I'm telling it that I can only choose one of these months in this list, and so I can say January, or I could say quarter to date, and so it's 44,985 right there. Now let's quickly just go over how this data validation in both these cells were created. If you just select one of them, I'm going to open up the ribbon, Control plus F1, that'll pop down my ribbon, and then you're going to go to data validation here, and on the drop down data validation again, this dialog box will appear, and I've already told Excel, I said, hey, only allow list items, and the source of those list items are this source right here, this range. So I'm going to click here. Excel is looking at this range, so computer hardware, software, equipment. That's why those are the only values in this drop down arrow box. So I'm going to hit OK, and again you can see that right here. So hardware, software, equipment, just as it says here, and that's what these are labeled as well up top here. Let's just open it up with F2 and kind of dissect what's going on. So the Vlookup formula, we've seen what this does. The first value is always the lookup value, which is the computer hardware. So that's from our data validation. That's being looked up on this table on the leftmost column. That perfectly makes sense. So I'm on the computer hardware. I'm on this row right now. That's where Excel's looking at. And now Excel's trying to figure out, all right, which column do you want me to return? Which value? So it comes over here. Obviously, this is the table. This is the table right here that we're referencing. And then in the column index, here's a brand new formula we haven't talked about, the match formula. And the match formula goes ahead and says, all right, from, first of all, let's see, it's B7 to F7. B7 to F7. And B7 to F7, that's the top headers. So what this formula does is it takes the range and it calls this number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it says wherever this value C23, which is the month right here, Q1, wherever Q1 is found within this range on the lookup array, right here up above here. So whenever it sees Q1, which is in the 5th column, go ahead and return that value. And just like the Vlookup formula, it has a match type, either exact or approximate. So 0 is exact. So it's exactly looking for this value that's C23, which is Q1. So it's exactly looking for Q1 right here. It finds it on the 5th column, goes ahead, returns 5. Let's just evaluate this real quick. So I'm going to highlight this entire formula, evaluate it with F9, and you can see it returns 5. So that's how that formula is working. I'm going to undo it so I don't paste it in as text, Control Z, and I put false because I'm looking for an exact answer or an exact match for the computer hardware here. So I'm going to hit enter and return it. Now I think this makes sense, and I really want to point out to you why this is dynamic. And it's dynamic not just in the vertical sense where we're changing which vertical piece here in the Vlookup formula, but we're also doing the horizontal, column lookup number by having something that's more intuitive than just a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of a thing. Hey, we're choosing from months, which makes sense to users as saying, hey, I want to know February's data or February's forecasted depreciation expense, and therefore it returns this number. So by going ahead and sticking this match formula within the Vlookup formula, you really do get an awesome dynamic formula that I'm sure that a lot of people will be impressed by, just because you're not using column number references, you're using column header references and then searching for it using the match function. So let's go ahead and get rid of this one and then start looking at this last example that I have here. Now in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and remake the table above, but in a summary format. As you can see, I just have the depreciation type, those subtotals right here, listed out, and that's all I want to find. So I want to skip over these middle items that are adding up to the subtotals of these computer hardware, software, and equipment. So let's start right here in this Vlookup formula and pop into with F2. And just like we've done with all of our formulas so far with Vlookup, we're going to look up this value. This first value is computer hardware. Again, we're summarizing above, so that's the first subtotal. And we're looking up that value. Notice that we have a $sign here on the column. So we want it to stay fixed in the column here and be able to pull down to the next value below when this formula is copied downward. But when we copy it over, we want it to stay in column B. Then this is obviously the table that we're referencing. Notice that these are an absolute reference as well, and this is a full absolute on both the columns and the rows. The next piece is the column index, and up above, so I've manually typed in 2, 3, 4, and 5 to therefore be able to easily plug in which column I want to have returned. So January, February, March, and Q1. And this reference will be pulled over every time I copy from January to February to March based on how I have the $sign set up, where I'm fixed on my rows, but on my column side, I'm not fixed here. So therefore it will be moving from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 when I move it over, but when I move it down, it's always going to stay on row 5 and not come down from there. The last piece is false, obviously, because we want it to match perfectly to computer hardware. So when it sees computer hardware up here, it needs to perfectly say that, and it will return the corresponding value. So I'm just going to hit enter, copy this, and actually just arrow over and down, and then right click and paste special as formulas, just so I don't get rid of my nice formatting here. The last thing that we need to do is stick in this variance. It's very important that you always put in a variance on the totals, and especially if it's there and easy to do. So let's just do that quickly. And one thing I want you to notice of what we just did here is that we made a dynamic table that's summarized by this table that has a little bit more detail up above. And so therefore, if you need to make any changes, you're going to make it up here. So to say to this item, that needs to be $8,000. Well, that changed all throughout up top, plus it also changed down here as well, and we don't have any variances.